video on your stream?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We'll do that first.
Okay, and we're live. Hello, everyone. So once again, I'm joined with Dr. Avi. Once again, Mike the Vegan has made a ridiculous, nonsensical response to another one of our debunks of his heart disease reversal claims, specifically atherosclerotic, atherosclerotic
Coronary artery disease.
Yeah, coronary artery disease. So, and on top of that, Dr. Michael Greger has also made his own response. He did a live stream earlier today, and he briefly commented on the whole situation. So, first, you wanted to respond to that, right?
Yeah, we'll respond to that. I'm going to make an announcement about Dr. Greger, and then we'll get to Mike the Vegan. All right, so let's go and let's pull up Dr. Greger's video.
All right,
I'm going to play it.
All right, Johnny asks Dr. Greger with lots of G's, what do you think about Dr. Avi and Vegan Gain saying heart disease isn't reversible?
All right, so right off the bat, this is not what we said, Johnny. I didn't say heart disease is not reversible. All I said was that we don't have the data to show that any diet or lifestyle intervention reverses heart disease. That's what I've said. I'm not saying it's not possible to reverse heart disease.
Right. So you're just agnostic. You're just saying the burden of proof hasn't been met.
Yeah. So the question already has a false premise. But anyway.
I've had a lot of respect for Avi, but I think that we've gotten to some semantics here. That's part of the problem. Part of the problem is this is relying on an outdated, in part, oversimplified kind of plumbing model.
I'd like to know how he gets to that. I mean, if you watched the video, I've covered everything. I've covered stenosis, I've covered plaque, I've covered blood flow, I've covered endothelial function, I've covered symptoms, I've covered events. It's this idea that it's semantics. I don't know what you're talking about. But also, if you want to talk about semantics, look at what Ornish and Esselstyn claim. They're very specific. We'll get to it, but go on.
Of heart disease, which, if it had any scrap of truth with it, angioplasty would actually save people's lives, right?
No, that's not necessarily true. So again, really specific. So let's actually just go remind everyone what claims were actually made. So I'll just share my Discord screen. Okay. So just to remind everyone, this is on Ornish's website. You can reverse heart disease with the Ornish Lifestyle Medicine Program. The reversal is measured in two ways. We showed both plaque regression at 1 year and more at 5 years, and increased blood flow of 300 to 400%. So two claims are being made here. Claim number one, that they're showing plaque regression. Claim number two, they're showing increased blood flow. I've addressed both of these things. Now, if you want to have some comprehensive, different definition of heart disease, present it and present a clear way I could adjudicate reversal from non-reversal, that's fine. But with respect to the definition I was using, I was attacking the claim of plaque regression. And so you're just changing the topic. And also, if you want to say that this is on Ornish's website, but Ornish didn't particularly write this himself specifically, he wrote his paper. And the conclusion of his paper says more regression of coronary atherosclerosis occurred after 5 years than after 1 year in the experimental group. In contrast, in the experimental group, coronary atherosclerosis contributed to the progress and more than twice as many cardiac events occurred. So Ornish is the lead author on his paper, and he wrote this in the conclusion. So the claim is very clear: regressing coronary atherosclerosis. Now, Dr. Greger says that if that were true, then we would expect angioplasties to save lives. First of all, it's not necessarily true. That wouldn't follow. Remember, just because what we're talking about here is regression of plaque. Even if you do a rotor-rooter, yes, it's true, you can regress plaque. Even if you scrape the plaque out, you can regress plaque. That's true. No one ever said that there's an entailment that in certain contexts, like asymptomatic coronary stenoses, that there would be a mortality benefit. If all we mean is whether there's plaque regression or not plaque regression, which was the claim, then it doesn't follow. There's no entailment that there's going to be a mortality benefit.
Yeah,
Now,
you could
I'll
even,
yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
It could
Like,
get
you
worse.
Yeah. The plaque could get worse, and then you'd see an improvement in symptoms. Like, it doesn't necessarily matter. Yeah.
Plaque can get better. You can regress plaque, and you can have a greater risk of events. You can destabilize greater risk of event, but it's still true that plaque is regressed versus not regressed. So these things are tangential to each other. So he's just conflating two different issues. He's not understanding. And by the way, I've addressed the other stuff. I've addressed the events. I've addressed the symptoms. I've addressed the blood flow. I've addressed all the other stuff too. But he's not understanding why I brought that point up. It's not to talk about what he's trying to talk about. It's talking about a different claim that was made by Ornish and Esselstyn. Anyway.
Right? Physically opening up an artery. In fact, opening up an artery and then sticking a stent in to prop it open, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work for saving people's lives. It doesn't even work for preventing heart attacks. It doesn't even work for symptoms.
Okay, this is very...
In terms of decreasing angina compared to placebo, compared to sham surgery, compared to fake surgery. It doesn't work. You say, wait a second. You're opening up an artery, increasing blood flow to the heart muscle. How could that not help? I've got a 2.5-hour webinar coming up October 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern time. On the effects of statins. So I'm going to go through all the statin research and all the stents. Statins and stents. A new webinar just announced today, actually.
Okay. Well, I hope in your new webinar you explain how what you just said was highly misleading. So, yes. So with asymptomatic disease, yes, you can do a stent, you can do bypass, and you won't see a mortality benefit compared to sham surgery. Fine, that's true. For STEMIs, it's not true at all. You do see a mortality benefit. And for NSTEMIs, the mortality benefit is more modest. The symptom benefit's more modest than STEMIs, but they are indicated. There is some benefit there. For stable CAD, for stable cardiac disease, yes, you're correct. A stent or an angioplasty won't have a mortality or a symptom benefit. But that doesn't mean categorically, universally, these procedures don't have benefits. For STEMIs, they clearly have mortality benefits. That is, anyone could look this up. There's paper after paper asserting this. No one would let a STEMI go without stenting it. Now, that's not the point of this conversation. The point of the conversation is just we were talking about something else. Now, if you want to talk about events, we've covered events. If you want to talk about symptoms, we've covered symptoms. If you want to talk about the PET scans and improved blood flow, we've covered all of that. If you want to talk about endothelial function, guess what? We covered that too. Watch our video. So this idea that I'm just focusing on one thing, it's just not true. Let alone the fact they've actually claimed that one thing. Should be tracking that, but I'm not just focusing on one thing. I've covered a whole broad spectrum of things that people are using to call reversal anyway. But let's get into some good news with Dr. Greger. So, as some of you may have known from the previous video, Dr. Greger has reached out to me to help him fact check his material. And even though just today he is continuously misrepresenting my position and won't have a conversation on it publicly or privately, I'm going to help him, and I'll explain why. I'll read off my community post. So, following recent events, Dr. Greger has reached out for my help to assist him in fact-checking his work to ensure that future videos will not have misinformation. NutritionFacts.org has many fact-checkers, especially for his books, because you can't go back and correct your books after the fact that they're already in people's hands. But per Dr. Greger, no one's fact-checking the video content before he's recorded. And Dr. Greger has requested that I be the sole individual to fact check that work to nip any misinformation in the bud going forward. So I have mixed feelings about this. So for one, Dr. Greger continues to misrepresent my critique of heart disease reversal, and so far has refused to discuss the topic with me. But on the other hand, Dr. Greger has one of the largest platforms in disseminating health information to the vegan community. And because of that, it would just be a huge, it would make a huge difference for our movement. And it's very important for legitimate information to spread. So after careful consideration, I've decided to swallow my pride and help Dr. Greger for the benefit of our community, even though just today he has gone to his audience to misrepresent my position after answering a loaded question. But I can only hope that one day he will open up to, well, I'll just tell you why he's not doing it. So he's convinced that Dr. Ornish will convince me. Dr. Ornish is not communicating with me. He will only communicate with me once my peer-reviewed publication is published, and he will communicate in the form of a response in the journal, and back and forth we go through the journal. That's how Dr. Greger thinks Dr. Ornish is going to convince me that he's right and I'm wrong. I don't know why he thinks that, because Dr. Ornish has already written to me in an email why he thinks I'm wrong, and none of the arguments are any good at all. But he did say that if I'm not convinced after that whole journal exchange, that he'd be willing to have a conversation. That's going to take a very long time, and I can only hope, Dr. Greger, if you're watching this, that you won't misrepresent my view in the meantime. So I'll be helping Dr. Greger so that he can put out information to the vegan community that will be accurate. And a couple things I want to make absolutely clear to everyone: what this does mean and what this doesn't mean. This does not mean that I am associated with nutritionfacts.org. That's number one. It also does not mean that I'm going to have the time to correct everything Dr. Greger puts out. If more information comes out, it doesn't necessarily mean that I vetted it. So if you see a video and something is inaccurate, don't say, oh, even like I may have vetted it, I may have not vetted it. I have a limited amount of time, I'll try. What it also doesn't mean is that I now agree with Dr. Greger on any of my previous disagreements or his misrepresentations of my views and refusal to discuss them. It doesn't mean I'm not going to go hard on him. It just means that I'm going to try to do what's best for our community, and so I'm going to try to work together. I also want to make very clear that I'm not going to be taking any payment for this. Everything I do is going to be a favor. I also want to extend this offer to other public figures in the vegan community that I strongly disagree with on many things. This includes you, Mike, by the way. If you want my help, just reach out and ask. My time is limited, but I will try to do what I can. I really hope this sparks a newfound commitment to truth in our movement. And with that, let's go to Mike. Okay. So I'll just share my screen and we'll go to Mike's comment. All right. So here is Mike's comment. He says, I'll just read the whole thing and then we'll go through it bit by bit.
Sure.
Mike says, me in 2026. This new vegan study showed a 20% reduction in plaque volume using IVUS. AVI. But there is nothing definitively proving that 20% would have a clinical impact. You get my point? It appears that AVI will sidestep any claim, any new information that is presented. Take this clear bait and switch with SFR. I presented a study showing that SFR was superior to the metrics he put forth for clinical lesion severity. He stretches a limitation about this finding to somehow apply to all of the severe stenoses in Ornish's study, as if all severe stenoses are certainly surrounded by totally jagged, turbulent arteries with unreadable proximal and distal references. A ridiculous assumption. Then somehow minor changes in these reference measurements offset a 45% improvement in this metric By the way, they actually do. We'll go through the math on that. They actually can, I should say. And actually not just follow at 45%. They can actually offset more than 45%. And we'll go through that later. I must have not read the study, though, and I am clearly a pseudoscientific hack and so on. So, Mike, well, you know what? I'll just read the whole thing. We'll go through this. Up until now, I haven't addressed the personal attacks that are baked into these videos against me and virtually all vegan doctors. I have been holding back, but ask yourself, how is it that Avi is pretty much the only one that is allegedly right? Gregor is a quack. So is Esselstyn, Ornish, and his accomplished cardiologist co-author, quacks. And heck, former American College of Cardiology president himself, Kim Williams, co-wrote that a plant-based diet reverses CAD, so he must be uneducated too. Lancet, wrong. Medicare, wrong. Harvard Heart Letter, wrong. If you don't engage or agree with Avi, you too are a quack. He is building a case where his followers are made to believe that he is the only credible source, and I hope this can be reflected upon. But for many, the damage is done here. With me, my channel is now worthless to them, which I guess has been the goal. I just ask that you don't write off all the amazing people above. Finally, to the notion that I am somehow hurting the vegan movement by claiming what all of the above also claim is the ultimate gatekeeping of vegan advocacy here. It is okay to have different beliefs within the vegan movement. It doesn't always mean that it hurts the animals, but making content that addresses animal issues that I have been putting my time and energy toward instead of this discourse does have a bit of a chance to help some animals. So that is what I will continue. That is what I will continue to do, despite the disgust generated for me here. Whew. Okay. There's so many places to begin. Okay. We'll just take it from the top. So Avi, but there's nothing definitively proving 20% would have a clinical impact. Again, Mike is just assuming what I will say in the future at this point. I actually said IVUS would be the way to measure it. Now, if it turns out by some miracle that we have even better technology of measuring plaque that shows IVUS doesn't work, fine, but I highly doubt that will happen. The reason I've changed my view in quantitative coronary angiography is because the IVUS data shows we can't make that inference. And yes, it's the delta issue, Mike. It appears Avi will sidestep every claim. Bait and switch from SFR. I presented a study showing that SFR was superior to the metrics he put forth for the clinical lesion severity. Mike is saying that I stretch a limitation about this finding to somehow apply to all of the severe stenosis in Orange study. That's not true, Mike. I did not say it applies to all, and nor do I need to say it applies to all. And as if all those severe stenoses are certainly surrounded by totally jagged, turbulent arteries with unreadable proximal and distal references. No, Mike, it's not. That's not the problem. The problem is not that they're not unreadable. The problem is when you get the reading, it results in a spurious SFR. We'll go over that. A ridiculous assumption. It's not an assumption, Mike. On the average, it's actually true. Not what you said, but the problem of pseudo-regression, the problem that the reference artery decreases. And we'll go through the math on why that is a problem on the average. Then somehow minor changes in these reference measurements offset a 45% improvement in this metric. They can actually, Mike. We'll go through it. I must not have read the study, though, and I'm clearly a pseudoscientific hack and so on. So it's not that you're a pseudoscientific hack. It's that you're just out of your depth. I'm sorry. When I did this, I didn't just pull this out of my ass. I went to the experts. When I made these videos, I went to experts from Harvard, interventional cardiologists, and I ran my arguments by them. I went to multiple interventional cardiologists from the plant-based community and from not from the plant-based community. I've spoken to statisticians. I've done my due diligence here. It's not that you're a pseudoscientific hack, Mike. It's just that you have this. Look, there's a combination of things. Like Mike, there's this tendency. What you do here is you don't have earned credibility, and yet you have this tendency to think you're right about something when you have no experience whatsoever. You have no knowledge. You're clearly wrong. And instead of running it by, when people have asked you to run things by people such as myself, I know for a fact that you've told them, hey, no, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to do a video on it. And so that's the issue. The issue is you just don't have earned credibility. You go and you make these videos without thinking you're just totally right when you're just completely out of your depths. You don't have the wherewithal to evaluate this stuff. And we're going to go through it again. So let's take the SFR. So recall the equation, and I'm actually going to correct something I said before in a previous video. So when we recall the equation for the change in pressure, which was 8 pi times the blood viscosity times the stenosis length divided by the cross-sectional area of the stenotic segment multiplied by 1 over the cross-sectional area of the stenotic segment multiplied by the blood flow plus the blood density divided by 2 multiplied by 1 over the cross-sectional area of the stenotic segment minus 1 over the cross-sectional area of the normal segment, that whole term gets squared, times the blood flow squared. Now, I made two mistakes here. That doesn't change the criticism. One mistake I made was that I said it gets more negative. I shouldn't have said that because the whole term gets squared. So as the stenotic segment, the normal segment here gets smaller, this whole term gets larger and the magnitude decreases. Now, it's theoretically possible for it to increase if the normal segment gets smaller than the stenotic segment. But that is going to be incredibly rare, if not impossible. The stenotic segment will almost always be smaller than the normal reference segment. The other thing is this is not an N, it's eta. It's the Greek symbol eta. So it's A of eta. But in any case, it doesn't change the critique because the central problem is still the same. The problem is that when you have pseudoregression, your reference diameter gets smaller, the magnitude of this term gets lower. And because of that, the change in pressure drop is lower. And if the change in pressure drop is lower, your SFR or CFR, stenosis coronary reserve, stenosis coronary flow reserve, will be greater, spuriously. And we're going to go through these values. So Mike's trying to say a couple of things here. So he's trying to say that the degree of the normal reference artery and the severe stenoses it's just small. It's too small for it to matter. Well, Mike, if you actually look at the decrease in the normal artery, the absolute decrease of it is actually greater than the increase of the stenotic segment. This opening up of this minimal luminal diameter change, it's actually less of a magnitude than the absolute decrease of the reference diameter. Now, I want you to just visualize how coronary flow reserve or stenotic coronary flow reserve works. So there's a standardized aortic pressure, which is 100 millimeters of mercury. And then the CFR is where it meets this line. This on the x-axis, you have Q over Q rest. So that's your blood flow in a hyperemic state divided by your blood flow at rest. And where the delta P, this pressure drop, ends up meeting this line, that's where you get your CFR. So you're going to have a pressure drop. You're going to have from 100 to the standardized aortic pressure to a certain pressure. So each big box over here is it's going to be 20. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So it's going to be 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So each of these big boxes is going to represent 20 millimeters of mercury, and the normal CFR is going to be 5, and each of these ticks is going to be 1 CFR point. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Easy. Okay. And recall that so just a refresher. So this is not SFR. This is FFR. Recall that as the pressure drop increases, as the stenosis gets worse. You remember that, Richard?
Yeah.
And as the stenosis improves, the pressure drop decreases. So notice how that makes sense, right? So if you have a large pressure drop, your CFR is really low, which makes sense. That's a bad thing. You want your CFR to be high. So if you have a large pressure drop, you're going to have a large stenosis. You're going to have a really plaqued up artery. But if the stenosis improves, you will expect the CFR to increase because the pressure drop is going to be lower. And so if you only drop here, you're going to have a CFR, you could be up to 4 over here. So hopefully conceptually that makes sense. Now,
It's easy for me to understand anyway.
Now I've plugged in these values. I've just plugged in the values for, let's get this up on this scientific calculator. Okay, I'll have to share my, what I'm gonna have to do is share my, I'll have to share this screen. Okay, cool. So I'll share this over here. All right, so what I did was I took the normal reference diameter and I took the stenotic segment of the average reference diameter and the average stenotic segment diameter, and I plugged it into that equation. So this is that whole equation. And what I did was, for those who don't see units, I kept everything in standard SI units, so kilograms, meters. This pressure over here is going to give you pressures in pascals. I converted that into millimeters of mercury after the fact. For the stenosis length, they don't give you stenosis length, so I actually ranged that to get to the pressure drop that gives you their SFR, because that was the one variable that I didn't have. The other things I'll let you know is that it's very hard to, sorry, I shouldn't even say that's the one variable I didn't have. This is just going to be a conceptual example of just how much this changes. So going back to the term for the stenotic segment of the artery, actually, we'll do that after we do the calculation because there are some limitations to this. So you can see this is the amount of pressure. If you convert that into the pascals into millimeters of mercury, what you get is 57 millimeter of mercury drop. So let's take a look at where that gets you to. So I'll just share the screen. So 57, and if anyone wants to check my calculations, they're posted on the Discord over here. You can just copy this and plug this into the scientific calculator. So 57 millimeters of mercury drop. And if you look over here, if you take 100 and you go down to 57, it's just not dropping to the 60 mark. You go over here, you meet up here, and you'll get around a CFR of 2, or 1.94, which was the SFR. Now, it might be off by a pixel or two, but you get the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's do the same thing. One thing I'll say before that is the length of the stenoses and the cross-sectional area. So you can't just calculate the cross-sectional area just by putting in pi r squared. So I wanted to do that. That would have been really nice for the stenotic segments, but they're not regular. They could be jagged, they taper. And so you can't really, if you actually try to plug it in for the delta one, you don't get a good result. You don't get accurate results, I should say. But it's a lot easier to do it with the reference artery, just to test what spurious results reference arteries give you in this formula. So this would be the reference artery. The Q values are calculated based on the reference artery, by the way. They just assume 15 centimeters per second of blood flow for resting. And then you multiply that by the cross-sectional area of the normal reference artery, get blood flow. And then that blood flow is going to be the same thing in the stenotic segment. So the blood is going to be going at faster than 15 centimeters per second to maintain the same rate of blood flow. Anyway, let's take a look at what happens when we go to these severe stenoses and when we get this type of decrease in the reference artery, which was statistically significant and greater in magnitude than the improvement in the stenotic segment. But let's just calculate it. Let's just see what happens if we plug it in. And yes, I know that arteries aren't perfectly cylindrical. They have some sort of, they're elliptical to some degree, but this is just an estimation. So I will go and share the screen. So let's remember the value here, right? It was 7,600 pascals. Now we just pasted it in what the value is going to be when we drop. Okay, everything constant, we're just having pseudo regression. So this is the effect. That's the difference. It goes from 7,600 pascal to 5,020 pascal.
It's pretty huge.
And that's just the effect of that tiny difference Mike was talking about. That's the difference in pressure drop. So what does that come out to be in CFR? Let's find out. So that amount of that 5,020 pascals, that comes out to be, let's see. So what is that? 27 millimeters of mercury, I believe it, or 37. Let's see.
Are you sharing? You should share the screen.
Yeah. So yeah, it comes out to be 37. So 37.65 millimeters of mercury. And then, so where does that get us? So there's a difference of 57 and 37. It's almost 20. 57 or 37.65. It's almost a difference in 20 millimeters of mercury. So imagine if the first time around we dropped 57, we were over here, we're around 2. And then we're dropping only 37 points. Okay, so this is 20. This is, we're like around here, below 40. Where are we now? We're almost at 3. We almost went from 2 to 3. We almost improved. Our CFR improved from almost 2 to almost 3.
Yeah.
While the reference, and the only difference that happened here was that the reference artery got smaller.
Yeah, so it's safe to assume that, yeah, this isn't a very good metric to go by.
And it's not a very good metric to go by when it's not a very good metric to go by. I agree with that too. But there's 2 reasons. Number one, it's a terrible metric to go by, especially when you have evidence of pseudoregression, when you have evidence of the reference artery getting smaller, which is, by the way, what happened here. And then, so just to put this into perspective, that improvement in SFR, that 45% improvement that Mike was talking about, that's 0.85. Okay, that's an increase in 0.85. We just saw that just this alone has the ability, and it may not in this case because it depends on where you are, it depends on other factors, it depends on the length of the stenosis, it depends on that change compared to the change in minimum luminal diameter. But just that change alone can get you a spurious result of a greater difference in CFR than the effect that Mike is trying to show. So yes, Mike, that difference actually makes a big difference. That small difference that you're calling small makes a huge difference in CFR. If you want to consider that 45% improvement in CFR huge, you have to consider this huge too. It's greater, or at least it can be greater. And you haven't shown that it's not. And no, it doesn't have to apply to all stenoses, Mike. Remember, the 45% improvement wasn't for all stenoses either. Not to mention that we don't do things based on cherry picking. We take averages. I mean, this is basic, Mike. You know this. We take averages. We look at data. So, yes, I'm going to go by the average, just like the improvement in SFR was an average. That's why I'm looking, and also on average, the reference artery got smaller, statistically significantly, and to a greater degree than the minimum luminal diameter opened up. What's the problem? That's just one criticism, by the way, Mike. And I'm just going to repeat this. I'm going to keep repeating it, Mike, because every time you respond, you don't address the second criticism. The second criticism is delta X correlating with delta Y is not the same thing as X correlating with Y. These are snapshot values when you compare it to FFR, the gold standard. Snapshot values, the correlation coefficient is 0.45 or something. That's not the same thing as delta SFR and delta FFR. And Mike, if you wanted to make your case stronger, you could have done so. You could have just looked at all the stenoses. Look at this. The SFR over here for all stenoses, statistically significantly improved from baseline to follow-up and compared to the control. And there's no evidence of overall, on average, pseudoregression. Now, there's evidence of pseudoregression for the severe stenoses, and they were lumped into all stenoses, so that argument may not end up going through. But Mike could have actually made a stronger argument over here. Why didn't he do it? Because the results don't look as impressive, and he wants to blow the results up.
Or 3.94. Yeah, or he just flat out doesn't understand what he's looking at.
Yeah, that's true too. Or he just doesn't understand what he's reading. Or he just doesn't try to read it. 3.94 to 4.07, that's a very small difference. You could make that argument, but that fails too because, number one, the stenoses that did show pseudoregression were lumped into there. Maybe, but even if you want to argue, well, on the average it wasn't, the other problem is the delta problem. So I want to hear you respond to this, Mike. The correlation between SFR and FFR is around 0.45. It varies, so that can be lower. It can be 0.33, or it can be as high as 0.73 or something if you're talking about myocardial FFR in one 1995 study, highest I've ever seen. But that's a snapshot correlation. Strong correlations can turn into zero correlation when you look at delta of the same metrics. We've seen examples of that. Go back to and watch our previous videos. It was the same problem that you've been confusing all the studies with QCA and CCTA and IVUS and saying, oh, look, there's a correlation. There isn't. Not with respect to what we're talking about. You're confusing delta metrics with snapshot correlates. So 2 issues, Mike. Please address both of them. Let's continue. Oh, now we're going to just do into the... See, this is boring. It's just the personal attacks now. All right, We'll go through it. I like going through the science. Now we're just going to do... All right, whatever. Up until now, I haven't addressed the personal attacks that are baked into the videos against me. And virtually all vegan doctors. I have been holding myself back. How is it that Avi is pretty much the only one allegedly right? I'm not... So that's a straw man. I'm not saying that I'm the only one allegedly right. There are other people that I consider... I don't consider right about everything. I don't consider myself right about everything, but I do consider other people valuable, and I do consider other people to be reliable. So just one example, you know, Mike, Danielle Bellardo, I consider her reliable. So it's not, so you saying I'm the only one right. I don't know why you're saying that. Jack Norris, he's another person I've specifically recommended being put on the reliable list. There are others as well. Rob Osfeld, by the way, who has changed his view on the matter, just so you know. And actually, you do know. But yeah, I mean, it's not true. It's just a flat out lie. Like, I consider other people reliable. It's not, I'm not don't think I'm the only one who's just allegedly right about things. Anyway, Gregor is a quack. Well, Estein Ornish and accompanied cardiologist, co-authors Quacks and Heck, former American College of Cardiology president himself, Kim Williams, co-wrote the Plant-Based Diet versus CAD. Okay, a couple things. So I went over my views about Dr. Gregor, but at least Dr. Gregor reached out, Mike. As much as I can't stand Dr. Gregor misrepresenting my views, just like I can't stand you misrepresenting my views, at least he reached out for some things. Even if he won't have a conversation about this topic, at least he did. At least he tried. At least he put in some effort, and that's why I'm agreeing. And by the way, if you put in some effort, I'm happy to help you too. Anyway,
this is also just real. I just want to point out how Weasley this is. Like, he's trying to make it seem ridiculous that you're criticizing any of these people at all. Like, they can be wrong. It's just
none
insane.
None of these people are demigods, Mike.
Yeah.
Kim Williams, again, people can change their view, Mike. Cardiologists have changed their views. Kim Williams can change his view. There have been plant-based cardiologists who have made the reversal claims, who have publicly, that have changed their views on the topic. after they've seen what I've put out. That's okay. And if you, and I wouldn't speak for any of them, and especially if you know they've changed their view, which I'm not saying you do know, but if you do know that they've changed their view, going back to their previous recordings and trying to use them as evidence would become very, very dishonest. Let alone an appeal to authority. These people can be wrong. No one is immune. I can be wrong too. That's fine. Some people have pointed out some things I were wrong on just in the last video. Guess what the first thing I did was? I corrected them. And I admitted, and I wrote publicly in the comments, and I'm making a video now correcting those previous things. That's what you do when someone points out to you that you're wrong about something. You announce the correction. Anyway, if you don't engage or agree with Avi, you two are a quack. No, you're a... He's building... If you misrepresent me and you won't have a conversation with me, you're dishonest. You're not acting in intellectual honesty. He's building a case where his followers are made to believe that he is the only credible source. Again, that's just not true. And I've hoped that this can be reflected upon. Again, I don't know where you're getting this from. There's specific evidence to the contrary. But for many, the damage is done here with me. My channel is now worthless to them, which I guess has been the goal. I just ask that you don't write off all the amazing people above. Mike. No, it's your channel is not worthless to them. You have the chance of making your channel very worthwhile to them. Just stop digging your heels into the sand, reach out, let's have a conversation. I'll be respectful. I'm clearly capable of doing that. You are too. It's never too late to drop the ideology. Seriously. Let's just talk. Finally, to the notion that I'm somehow hurting the vegan movement by claiming what all of the above also claim is the ultimate gatekeeping of vegan advocacy here. No, Mike, it's just pointing out my intuition that when you spread pseudoscience to the public, to our community, it hurts the vegan community. That's all it is. If you're wrong about it and it really is pseudoscience, and you really are giving them cannon fodder, yeah, that probably does hurt our community. That's all. It is okay to have different beliefs within the vegan movement. Yes, it is okay, but if you are clearly wrong about something, if you clearly don't have the wherewithal to go through the studies you claim to be going through, and you don't have earned credibility, and you won't check this with the experts, and you won't check you won't, even if you have a line to them, or if you won't check this with people, it doesn't have to be me. Go check it with, I can give you a line to the interventional cardiologist at Harvard, who pioneered quantitative coronary angiography. Run the arguments by him. I can give you his email. You don't have to go to me. I'm not even in the field. He's signed off on my arguments, by the way. But regardless, he'll tell you the same thing. The point is that you can have different beliefs, but when you have a platform that you do, and when you are spreading the type of pseudoscience you are, and when you're giving carnivores that much cannon fodder, it's not okay at that point. It's not. You're doing harm. You are damaging our community when you do this. And you don't have to. You can talk. You can come to me or other people, and you can have your views checked. Just like Dr. Greger came to have his views checked. Even though I can't stand him for a whole bunch of other reasons, I'm going to swallow my pride, and I'm going to be working with Dr. Greger. Not for money. It doesn't always mean it hurts the animals, but making content that addresses animal issues that I've been putting my time and energy toward instead of this discourse does have a bit of a chance to help some animals. So that is what I will continue to do despite the disgust generated for me here. Mike, that's fine. Go help the animals. All I'm saying is what you're doing here is not helping the animals. I highly doubt that's helping the animals. You were the one who decided. Look, you decided to make this whole video. This whole thing started, just to catch you up to speed and remind you of the history of this. You made a video saying, before our debate, you made a whole video, and people knew you were talking about myself and Daniel Belardo, even though you didn't mention us. You made the video about how Ornish and Esselstyn were right all along, and you can reverse heart disease after all. You didn't mention us by name, but you were saying, oh, some people in the plant-based movement, people knew you were talking about us. And before you made that video, Isaac reached out to you. He reached out to you, say, hey, run the argument by Avi before you go to the public. Why don't you run the argument by Avi? See what he thinks. And you said, no, I'm just going to make a video. That's how confident you are. And your arguments were terrible. They were really bad. You compared a plaque to a pimple, Mike. It was on that level. It doesn't have to continue this way. Like this is what you started. And this is what you're continuing to do. Now, if you move on, that's fine, but I really hope you have some intellectual honesty here. Let's just talk. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, honestly, this is starting to sound like Frank Tufano levels of dishonesty.
Yeah. Man.
Yeah. All right, well,
Yeah.
we do have somebody who asked a question in Streamlabs. So Access Audio donated $6. Hey, Dr. Avi, I didn't get my question in the last time, but what are your thoughts on the idea that a whole food, plant-based diet can reverse type 2 diabetes as promoted by Robbie and Cyrus of Mastering Diabetes? Thanks.
Okay, so it depends on what you mean by reverse. We have to be really specific because reverse is a very tricky word. If what you mean by reverse is improvement in blood sugar levels or blood sugar control, yes, I agree. If that's what you mean when you say the word reverse, sure. If what you mean is that you've cured your diabetes, I don't agree. I don't think that's been shown. It's very hard to show that. It has to do with the way diabetes is defined and De Morgan's law in logic. So if there's 4 different criteria for defining diabetes, diagnosing it, and it's a disjunction of those 4 things. So De Morgan's law would say to say something you do not have diabetes, you have to show that those 4 things are not there, not just any one of those 4 things are there. And it's very hard to do that. But if all you mean is just improvement in blood sugar, sure. Like you can improve your blood sugar control on a healthy diet. Yes, on a whole foods plant-based diet. Absolutely.
And
I
to
would
the
just
point,
be very, yeah, go ahead.
And would that be to the point where you could conceivably go off of like insulin or other medications?
At some point, you can decrease your insulin dosages, and at some point, you may be able to go off your insulin. I want to point out a very strong disanalogy between your sugar levels and your LDL levels here. If your sugar levels are dropping too low, that's dangerous. If you lose a bunch of weight, get your sugar under control, eat a whole food plant-based diet, and you improve your hyperglycemia, and then you're still taking the same amount of insulin, you can tank your blood sugar levels. That's a problem. If you make lifestyle changes and you lower your LDL level, and you take a statin and your LDL is lowered even more for secondary prevention, that's not a problem. You can lower your LDL level and keep lowering it. You're not gonna. It's actually fine. You can't do that with blood glucose. There's a fundamental difference there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that was a good response. I'm just looking through the chat to see if anybody has any questions, any thoughts. Okay, Daniel says disease reversal equals reversal of the progression of the disease. This would be obvious to anyone arguing in good faith.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So reversal of the progression. Just I'm not. See, here's the thing: when people say reversal of the progression of the disease, that still doesn't mean prevention of the progression. It means reversal of the progression, meaning the disease progressed and then that progression that happened reversed. You can't reverse something that hasn't happened yet. That's called prevention. So no, I mean, we can use that term. It's fine. It just means it's almost a tautology. I don't see how it's meaningfully different. Reversing the progression. Okay, so something progressed and then it reversed. That portion, that progression, however you define that segment of progression, had reversed. That's what you have to show. Has that been shown? No, it hasn't. That doesn't, like, using the phrase reversal of the progression doesn't get you out of this. Sorry.
Okay, Liam asks, are we getting a Mike versus Avi MMA match?
I'd be happy if he just spoke to me, let alone, I mean, look, at this point, I'd be happy if he fought me too. At least maybe I'll be able to talk to him about heart disease while I have him in a triangle. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. This doesn't directly relate, but how about we just, oh wait, no, never mind. New question on Streamlabs. Sprained ankle donated $5, Dr. Avi. Bit off topic, but I've watched your videos on organic foods. Are you still against organic for the dirty dozen?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still against organic. As a general heuristic, for ethical reasons, I am still against organic foods, organic plant products. You can look at my latest calculations comparing a organic diet to a conventional diet and how actually that squares up compared to, in terms of animal funding, compared to a glass of milk a day, and how much that actually ends up in the animal agriculture industry's coffers. And as far as health, I'm not convinced there's any meaningful health difference between the two at all.
All right. Let's see. Oh, here's one. What sort of studies would we need to find out if a whole food plant-based diet reverses heart disease?
Okay, so it depends how you're defining it. So if you're defining it in terms of plaque regression, you would look at IVUS. You would need an IVUS-based study, ideally a crossover trial. If not a crossover trial, a parallel trial design by which the control group, by which you can show two things: a statistically significant difference between the treatment effect and the control group, treatment and control, and statistically significant difference between the experimental baseline and experimental follow-up. If you're talking about it in terms, yeah, sure, go ahead.
And IVUS stands for intravascular ultrasound.
Intravascular
so you're
ultrasound.
Basically,
yeah. You don't.
Yeah, you're
you don't technically have to do it. There's other things. There's other technologies, CCTA. Although that's debated. Some people say IVUS is better. Probably is. Actually, it is. OCT, optical coherence tomography. That's another way that can be done. If you're talking about blood flow, you can do that too. So either same thing, crossover trial, or parallel trial design, which you can show those two statistically significant different things between treatment and control, and between experimental baseline and follow-up. And you can look, and you can do FFR. FFR would be a good way of doing it. That's a gold standard. Yeah.
And would crossover be preferable?
Yeah, I mean, yes, you're actually directly measuring with respect to, if you have, especially with isolated LAD stenosis, sure. If you're just looking at, looking with respect to a stenosis, yeah, that would be preferable than, or another way, and yes, you may even be able to do it with PET. If you act, but the problem with the Ornish PET was they didn't show a statistically significant difference between the experimental baseline and follow-up. You just have to be very clear about what you mean here. When you say reversal, what metric are you looking at? Well, if you're talking about, okay, well, I'll just keep answering the question. If you mean reversal in terms of endothelial function, you can do that with flow-mediated dilation. Although it's very, I may be looking into that and thinking there is questionable value in the deltas for FMDs, but that's a whole different topic. You would look at flow-mediated dilation, and you would not do what Lynn did, so not do what the study Mike cited, which did 90 different comparisons with 30 different endpoints, and then just report what was statistically significant, like p-hacking almost, without any correction for the problem of multiple comparisons. So you wouldn't do that. It depends what you're talking about. But with respect to whatever you're talking about, I can give you a trial design to do it. If you're talking about regression of plaque, I gave you the trial design. If you're talking about improved blood flow, I gave you the trial design. If you're talking about endothelial function, I gave you the trial design. And what not to do to botch the statistics. So.
Okay, how about we have this as the last question. What kind of doctor are you? Are you a cardiologist, surgeon?
I'm actually in dermatology. Oh my gosh, Avi's in dermatology. What in the world?
That means you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
That means I must not know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll say a couple of things about that. So number one, first and foremost, arguments stand on their own 2 feet, not on the people making them. So, and number two, most people don't realize this, but dermatology is actually the hardest field in medicine to get into. It requires the highest board scores, if not one of the highest, if not the highest. And sometimes it's tied for plastic surgery. It requires the highest board scores to get into, and it's in the top 3, if not top 4 requirements in terms of research requirements as well to get into dermatology. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to be an expert in cardiology necessarily because I'm a dermatologist, but it does have a little bit of a check to get into derm. It's
Yeah, that
incredibly
you're
difficult.
at least smart. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to be, there's like, as far as doctors go, you have to have, I mean, it's the highest average board scored accepted field in terms of board score requirements. So anyway, well, for whatever that's worth, like take it or leave it for what you will. But fundamentally, the response to that is arguments stand on their own 2 feet, not on the people making them.
All right, well, thanks for coming out again. Again, anybody who's interested in debating Avi, including like Mike the Vegan, any doctors, like anyone can go over to Ask Yourself or your Discord, debate you, and I will link...
Or anyone who's interested in reaching out for help. If any of you, any of the vegan public figures, if anyone's interested in, if they're worried about putting something out, if they're like, okay, I'm not really 100% sure about putting it, like, reach out to me. I can't promise I'll have all the free time to do it, but just at least try and reach out.
Yeah.
And I'll do what I can.
Yeah, and Avi's helped me with a few videos before. Yeah, so... And I will link his YouTube channel in the description, and I will also link his research Discord, so if anybody wants to look through all the research and the arguments, and you want to do that on your own, you can. But thanks for coming on, and have a good night, everybody.